Right here. This is Kathy LeCompte. Am I pronouncing that properly? And I won't go through her whole bio because the first question will deal a little bit with history, but Kathy is the second generation nurserywoman in partnership with her husband David on a seedling nursery in Salem and Brooks Tree Farm. Kathy's past president of the Oregon Association of Nurseries, past chair of Association of Government Relations Committee, and many other things. And then next to her is Elizabeth Estabrooks, who is the Oregon Women Veterans Coordinator with the Oregon Department of Veterans Affairs. And she advocates for and conducts outreach to women veterans and works towards improving data and research in the field, and also works with policymakers and program directors to ensure gender inclusivity. And next we have, pardon me, you're on my next page, Kendall Clausen, who's with Grant Makers of Oregon and Southwest Washington, been for about a year now. And prior to that was executive director of the American Leadership Forum of Oregon. And last but by no means least is Janice Mason, who is an associate principal at Mackenzie, a regional architecture and engineering firm headquartered in Portland, Oregon. So we have a really amazing, diverse group here. So why don't we jump right into the questions? And pardon me? Oh, I have to put this up. I'm sorry. I'm used to being super loud, but I'm realizing I'm not being loud. So why don't we start with you, Kathy? The first question is, what's your career story? And what stereotypes have you faced with respect to being a woman in your chosen field?
Well, gosh, I've had my fair share. Can you hear me? Get that a little hard. I've had my fair share. I'm going to stand up. I grew up on a farm family, and we had a wholesale nursery in my family. And so I thought, well, I'd go into horticulture. So I went to Oregon State University, where I was told that there's really no room for women in the nursery industry, and that if I wanted to study horticulture, I should expect to get a doctorate or do minimum wage work all the rest of my life. They said there just wasn't really a place for that. So I thought, well, I've already done the minimum wage part, and I wasn't really planning on 12 years of school. So I quit college, never did finish, and started my own nursery. That was 40 years ago. We'll have our 40th year next year. And in that length of time, I have risen up to fill every position that our Nursery Association offers, including president, chair of our Government Relations Committee. I'm current chair of our Political Action Committee. And I've faced a challenge or two over the years. In the beginning, when there wasn't a lot of women farmers, I once had a salesman refuse to accept an order from me because he thought it was so large. I didn't know what I was doing. And he actually asked me, do you have permission from your husband to place this order?
What did you say?
I was floored. I was just floored. And I don't remember what I said at the time, but when he called back later to verify with my husband, I said, that guy's mine. He's taking this order from me. He's not talking to you, he's talking to me. And he got used to it. If there's one thing I would imagine you're going to hear from all of us, and that is just do it. Be good at what you do. Be so good they can't ignore you. Be so competent they can't not take your order. And so that's my history. It's how I got to where I am now. And I'm not going to take up all the time. There's more to talk about, but things were rough in the beginning. And I just said, that guy's mine. I'm not going to let him buffalo me. He's going to take my order. He's going to know I'm competent. He's going to know I know what I'm doing. And he became a dear friend over the years.
Okay, so aren't you glad you came? All right. Next to Elizabeth, same question. What's your career story? What stereotypes have you faced with respect to being a woman in your chosen field?
So mine is sort of a long and circuitous route. So mine is filled with moments of sexual harassment, and I try not to. I actually do focus on that because it sort of defined a lot of what I did. And mine's made up of incidents of men saying, I want to talk to your boss, or when I was in the insurance and banking field for a long time, and men would, I was a licensed insurance agent, and I would answer the phone, and men would say, I need to speak to the man. And I would say, well, not in this agency, because you have to talk to me. And the stereotypes were often about me being a woman, or me not being big enough, or me not being smart enough. And my first job was when I was in, my first office job was when I was in college. Well, it was my second office job because my first one was when I was in high school, but I was working at a Forest Service job, and I could hear my boss and his friend in the back room, and the boss, and I didn't really get the joke at the time, but the boss said, his friend said, I'm surprised you hired her. Clearly you didn't apply the elbow test. And I didn't know what he meant, but my boss later told me that putting the elbows against the wall and the breast size. And so that was in 1977. And no, 77. And then I joined the Army, and it was a whole lot more. And there were 3,000 jobs that I couldn't do at the time because I was a woman. And so there was a lot of that. And then over the years, as time went by, I entered the field of domestic violence and sexual assault. And in that field, it became a battle of me against the law enforcement, because I was fighting for women who were being battered and raped. And that was me fighting men. I had in Eastern Oregon, I had the police chief who was sitting next to his boss, who was the city manager, and he looked at me and he said, little lady, and this is what he said, I'm not kidding, it'll be a cold day in hell before that woman tells me how to do that job. And that was my experience doing that work, because it was very difficult for them to have a woman tell them how to do their job, which was arrest the batterer. It's the law. And so I continued in that field of violence against women for a number of years. And eventually I went on to get my degree in social work, and I got this job. And so my career path has really been one that has been in, my bachelor's degree is in gender studies and political science, and with the emphasis on gender studies and how to apply that to policy and program development. And so my career path has been one that has led me in a way to encountering those moments and experiences that are ripe with discrimination and harassment. And so as the Women Veteran Coordinator, I'm pretty much enmeshed in working with people who have also experienced that throughout their lives and careers, because I work with women veterans who repeatedly were told that they couldn't do those jobs, who were repeatedly harassed. And so as part of what I do now, I try to push aside those stereotypes and ignore them, because they continue to happen. And we'll talk some more about how that works. But you know, one of the things that people ask me now is, what advice do you give young girls who are going into the military? And I said, you know, just they need to know their power and their value. And I think that's really important for young women, to move past, to know that you're going to encounter those harassments and those discriminations, and know your own power and your own value. Because if I had let all of that stop me, I would have stopped a long time ago. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. And next we have Kendall.
Good afternoon. Come on.
Good afternoon, welcome.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. So I'm Kendall Clausen. I am the Executive Director of Grantmakers of Oregon in Southwest Washington. I have been doing some form of nonprofit management for over 30 years. And you know, when I saw this question, I thought, it's interesting, because I don't typically think about my career trajectory as being primarily focused on what I've experienced as a woman. I'm one of those layered people that comes to the party with a number of things that people could act foolishly around. So, you know, I'm a woman, we'll start there, and I'm an LGBT woman. and I'm an African American woman. And so there's a lot of things to come to this party around. But for me, the thing that I always knew is that I cared about our people. I cared about our society. My intention in the beginning was to go to law school. I had set myself all up for that. I was ready to go. I had been accepted, and then a dear friend of mine called me from the side of the road and said, you know, I don't feel well. I feel, in fact, too scared to drive. Can you come get me? So I went, he told me about where he was, and I went to go pick him up, and he was on fire, like just hot. And I took him to the hospital, and they ran a bunch of tests on him, and at that point, found out that he had AIDS. So he was well beyond an HIV diagnosis. He already was like full on in the latter stages. And he didn't know. And I lived in this wonderful little bubble that I didn't know any of this stuff. None of this was touching my life. I went to UC Santa Cruz. I'm like by the beach. Everything's happy and fine. And yet what I started to experience just by having someone in my life who was experiencing something like this, and then all the things that come with it. So he was a middle-aged African-American man who had already lost his family because he had told them that he was gay. So he was already alone in the world. And so for me, I felt like I want to understand what this is. I see how this is impacting your life. I want to be present to you as a person, and really as an adopted family member. And so I started to work with him, and I started to volunteer for an AIDS organization. And then, as a good nonprofit CEO always wants to do, hey, why don't you, instead of volunteering, why don't you come? I've got this great thing that you should do over here. So my career really started in something that meant something to me, or a person that really influenced my interest. I have run Q Center, which is Oregon's LGBTQ community center. I was their first executive director there. I was there for 3 years before I got a phone call from Governor Kitzhaber, then Governor-elect Kitzhaber, who wanted to talk to me about a job, and I kept thinking, well, what do I want to talk to him for? Like, I don't know that guy. Like, I mean, I voted for him, but what is it, you know, it's like, you don't get those calls. So I went and I had a conversation with him. And probably one of the most inspiring conversations that I ever had. He wasn't talking to me like, ooh, check, 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 check. He was talking to me about what he wanted to do in the world. We've got 4 years. What are we going to do with this 4 years? So he hired me to be his executive appointments director. So I was sitting in front of 312 boards and commissions, working in partnership with him to decide who was getting this incredible opportunity. That is really where I started to see all of the layering come into effect. I am not of Salem. I am not of this world. I am a person who is running a nonprofit, doesn't know this system, doesn't know what you're allowed to say and not allowed to say, which I found out often because I said it. That's right. That's the lesson you learn. And then ultimately worked my way into a space where I was named as a deputy chief of staff, and I think that I am the first woman of color ever in the history of Oregon to be a deputy chief of staff for a governor. That says something, because that was like 2014 or 15. So 2015 is the first time you see somebody like me in that space where you've got that amount of visibility. So, you know, I'm conscious every time I walk into a room that I enter with this, but it's my job to give them everything else, to give them that sense of, you don't have to check off the boxes for me about what categories I cover. That's a bonus round for you. What you're getting, though, is someone who deeply cares about people who live in this state, who live in this world, and that feels responsible and accountable for doing everything that I can to make this better. So for career, yes, you walk into a room as a woman or as a woman of color, as an LGBTQ person, a woman, this is the external, but the meat of all of this is what you're bringing to the party. And every single one of you in here has something that you're bringing that's coming from here, that's coming from here, that's coming from here. So that's my career.
Thank you, Kendall. Janice, you're up.
Oh, are we supposed to push a button?
Could you just say it again?
I would push the button and it goes repeat. Oh yeah, okay, got it. Oh, Oh, now I should, look at that.
All right, I have a green light, so I think you guys can hear me. Okay, great. I'll put this in my pocket. Again, I'm Janice. I go by Jan. My career story takes you through a number of places. I lived in Oakland, California, where there was a lot of diversity already. And reflecting back and hearing some of my cohorts here and their stories, my first job, our president of the company used to run around the Lake Merritt there, and he'd come in right when I was starting my shift at 1 o'clock, because I work in high school, or I'd be at high school and then I'd go to work. And he'd walk around in his shorts, and then he'd take off his shirt and just talk to everybody that way. And then because it was when I arrived, he would talk to me in just, awkward moment with this attire, jogging attire. So I grew up I've seen a lot of change over time, and that's kind of, I didn't even know what was happening. I just felt awkward. I didn't understand what was happening. I moved to Guam, went back, that's where I'm originally born, and went back there as an adult and worked in the architecture and engineering industry. Anyone architects or engineers in the audience by chance? Oh, good. I can talk about them now.
We love them.
But I've been in that industry for a number of decades. I won't say exactly how many. But working in the architecture engineering industry and then doing that in Guam was very different from coming here to Portland 20 years ago. In Guam, I knew architects that were Chinese, Filipino, African American, Caucasian. They were all there. And it was a melting pot of professionals. Rewind 20 years ago, and I came to Portland. Took me about 6 months to find a job. Finally decided to take a job as a secretary, where a secretary was still a secretary. And I worked for Rick Saito, who is the CEO of the company, and I got very excited about being a part of an organization that had a Japanese American as the leader. I've been fortunate at this organization that's allowed me various roles. Today, you heard I'm an associate principal, which means I'm one of the owners. I'm a stockholder at the company. It's a firm of about 200 people in Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver, Washington. And through that, I've been very fortunate to have, I'm going to say, primarily men along the way that have supported me through my career. And there are only a few instances where I experienced some really challenging and difficult situations of being respected as a woman in the professional workplace. I think in the private industry, in the architecture engineering industry, I used to hear, oh, we don't see color, we don't see gender, we don't see that. Now we're talking about, well, you have to see it, because if you don't see it, you don't understand what that person's life experience can contribute. And so through my life experience now and through career, I'm really excited about where we are today in this conversation and having dialogue like today. So thank you, Veronica and Connie, for putting this together and inviting me.
Thank you very much, Jan. All right, how are we doing on time?
That's okay.
We're doing all right, okay. She's got to keep me honest. Okay, question 2, we'll once again go through here. Oh. Is it not on? Green? All right, okay. Next, we'll have the second question, which is, and we'll start with Kathy. How can diversity and inclusion be a priority for companies when businesses have other big issues to deal with, such as market risks, tightening budget, and the need to be highly competitive in the industry?
The first and most obvious thing, I'm not sure mine is on, I guess it is. The first and most obvious thing to me is there's 50% of the population is women. By failing to acknowledge that, you're automatically missing out on 50% of the opportunity. So from a hiring or business owner's perspective, just recognizing that, there's a lot of talent out there, there's a lot of bodies, a lot of human beings to work with, and it just makes sense to have women included. Over the 40 years that I've been a farmer, I have to say, things have changed radically. We no longer see ourselves as women farmers, we see ourselves as farmers. But I have to say, even in the most enlightened groups, we still see the most ridiculous things. Only a couple of years ago, the Obama administration actually sent people into the various states to talk to women about this sort of thing, to rise up and move to the top of your profession. And for us in agriculture, they suggested we have teas and invite our neighbors over for a tea to get to know them. And we just looked at them and said, you gotta be kidding me. We don't do teas anymore. We'll talk at the Farm Bureau where we are the president, or we'll talk at the Government Relations Committee where we are presenting testimony. We don't do a tea. So we're still overcoming ridiculous attitudes and misunderstandings, even among people who intend to be helpful. But I have to say, we no longer see ourselves as women farmers. We see ourselves as farmers. And I think that really has just come from a willingness to just go out and do it. And so 50% of us are women, let's just go do it.
Thank you.
I would
Okay,
say,
we're moving along at a good clip. We might need to,
okay.
so we get to all the questions.
I would say that the question, just stop ceasing to ask it that way. We shouldn't be formulating that question. It should be something that's woven into everything that we do. Because when we ask, how can we prioritize it in budgets? How do we prioritize it? It should become something that we are simply doing. Because until we're just making it part of what we do, it has to be a question. It should be automatic that when we are setting budgets, whether we're a nonprofit or a state agency, we're coming to that budget with that frame of mind. When we're developing policy at the legislature or in a nonprofit or a for-profit or a bank, we're looking at it through the lens of race and of gender and all of those things, because until we set those priorities that are woven through every single thing we do, we're doing it wrong. And that's the approach that we need to take. And when we take that approach, we can stop framing it as a priority, because as long as we frame it as it has to be a priority, companies are going to see it as, oh, now they want us to make it a priority. How come it gets to be a priority for women and not men? How come it gets to be a priority for people of color and not white people? And that's the wrong approach.
I got it now. So I actually read the question the same exact way. I was less interested in answering it, the question itself, but more about the choice to say, how are we dealing with women when we have other issues, as if it's some separate thing that we're supposed to be doing. I think ultimately, if we're going to be successful in anything that we're doing, we have to take into consideration all of the assets that you have. If you're sitting around and you've got, a fence to build, and you don't acknowledge that you've got a hammer in your toolbox, and that hammer can actually get those nails into that fence, then the fence doesn't get built. So it's the missing out on all the incredible gifts and skills, thoughts, abilities that everyone is bringing to the conversation. If you want to increase your marketability, then you want to reach across every line that you can get. That young person gives you a perspective. I literally can't do half the things in my office. I'm like, this is broken. And then, I have a 20-year-old who will go, oh, thank you, right? So if I don't consider the gifts that everyone that is involved with the work that we're doing, I'm not going to increase my productivity. I'm not going to increase my marketability. It's a necessary component that we are looking at this as an equity issue, but we're also looking at this as an inclusion issue. What would you miss if these people were not at the table?
For myself, can you hear me, in the private sector, It's have an interesting perspective about that. It may be slightly different, but on the same plane. Diversity inclusion, if you're not talking about it in private business, you're going to go out of business because it is an important topic right now, not just for a compliance situation. In Portland is an example with pay equity and the new acts that are law in that area, but workforce that are coming in. We've had different multi-generations. We're coming into that area where there's 4 generations working in the workplace, understanding that the values of the younger generation really revolve around diversity and inclusion, that diversity is what sparks innovation. All of those other items of market risk, budgets, that's just standard operating procedure. That's just standard to business. So the challenge though right now in all of the businesses is how do we talk about it and how do we go about engaging it and actually weaving it into everything we do? The how and not so much the what, but the how, because those are the new tools that firms are looking for.
Great, thank you.
Great segue.
All right, and then the next question has to do with the Equal Pay Act. Why do you think it, and what's happened since? Why do you think it's taken so long to close the pay gap?
Not being a sociologist, I still don't feel like this is working very well. Not being a sociologist, I'm not sure that I'm qualified to speak much to this one. But from a private business point of view, I can say that in our company, when people work for a long period of time, they have gradual increases in pay. And if they, for any reason, take time off and then maybe come back later, other people will have risen in those gradual increases, and then they'll come back in at the level they were when they left. So we run into that. I don't know in government if you have that same kind of problem or if you're more compartmentalized as far as pay scales, but in private industry, we reward as we go along. And so someone who leaves for a child, whether it's a man who go take a different job or a woman who takes time off for a child, when they come back at their old pay scale, and it gets out of sync. The other problem we run into in private business is sometimes government will intervene with a change in minimum wage or a change in some benefit that we're required to add, and then that will maybe throw off the scales that we had developed along the way. So those things tend to cause us to get out of sync accidentally. But my advice to you would be, if you think you've gotten out of sync for any reason, whether it's private industry or government, go to your boss and mention it. Don't be afraid. Don't just suffer in silence. Go say so. As a boss myself, if I know there's a problem, I want to hear it. So that's the easiest way to fix it.
I would say it's a combination of factors. One is culture. It's been we've suffered through a culture for generations where women have traditionally been paid less than men, and it's been okay. I think the other one is the mythology that women are now being paid the same as men, which is not true. And I think the other part is that there have been laws that have prevented us from saying how much we make, and that's a big problem. When you can't talk about what your salary is, it protects the person who's not paying an equitable salary, and it protects those who are making more money, and it harms those who are not making as much money. And every time pay equity comes up in the legislation, there's huge battles against it. And interestingly, people say, oh, it's going to damage the whole pay structure. It's going to be harmful. Well, it's not going to be harmful if you're paying an equitable wage to everybody already. What harm is there to making sure that we're paying the same wage? And people have a resistance to examining those wage equity scales, and that's what we need to start with, is making sure that we have laws that are in place and stop resisting having laws that demand that pay equity and not halfway not having 1 foot in and 1 foot out.
I completely agree with that. I think there's also, so for me, there's two things as well. So I think we're relying on this historical thing that says that women move in and out of the workforce because of children, right? So it's inevitable, right, that you're going to have a baby, which means that you're going to be out of this pool. Men are not going to do that, so they say. Men are not going to come in and out, so we should keep them consistent. And I think for me, the second piece is our willingness as women to tolerate this stuff. So we typically, when you're negotiating salaries, when you're first starting a job, a lot of women will just accept what's on the piece of paper. So this is how much we're going to pay you. Okay. And the other thing that they've done some research around is that women will also negotiate with a question mark at the end of everything. So 90,000, right? So when that question mark is at the end of that at the end of that sentence, it's now no longer negotiating. You've handed over the power to say, "I'm okay. Is this all right with you that I get this?" And men typically don't do that. They go in, they see the number, they say what they want. And I have actually done this over the last couple of jobs that I have had. And I think particularly in the nonprofit sector, women are ruling the way in this sector. And yet we're still, I know people who are running entire organizations making $60,000, $70,000. And in a nonprofit world, you're working bananas hours. So it's not like you're going to work at 9, you get your hour break, lunch break, and then you go home. You're at night, you're in the morning, you're doing all these things. So it's the ability for us as women to say that this is what I'm worth, plus I know how much this job is worth too. So it's not just, I'm fantastic, I am. And in order for me to accomplish this work in an effective way, I want to have the kind of salary that reflects that. So I've actually had to practice when negotiation time comes that you never hear that question mark at the end of that. I go in there like, if those were some really cute shoes that I liked and I could get some money off those shoes, I wouldn't hesitate getting that, right? So why can't we bump that up to the other direction to say, okay, this job is the most fabulous pair of shoes ever, and it's worth 100. It's worth 150. It's worth it. I'm worth it. Trust me, when I show up, when you give me that 150, I'm going to give you 150. And you might, if you treat me right, get 162, right? So it's our willingness to say, I'm not going to pose a question to you. I'm going to tell you, this is what I want. And if they don't want to give you that, then that's not your spot, because it's going to show up in other ways.
We're going to need more budget limitation after this.
Poor Cameron's like, shut up,
All
shut
women in the room are gonna ask for a
up.
raise.
You're killing me. That's right. You can put the question mark at yours.
I see
No,
some asking
maybe.
in the
Yes.
future.
I'll repeat, this is a safe place.
That's right, not to leave this room. Okay.
This is interesting, and I was, for me, I think of what came to mind, and I agree with my peers here. I think we're still struggling with all of the implicit bias that we have in our heads. Our brains, it's our neuroscience, how it works. Our brains like to categorize and package things in neat, tidy boxes, and it helps us to navigate the space that we normally work in and navigate how we move or make decisions or how we behave. And so it's really, while it's definitely a policy is an important part of this, I'm on the same page with Kendall about as individuals, we need to understand that if we're a decision maker, we need to check ourselves on our biases. And then as to Kendall's point, as to the women in the room, and actually for the men too, who may hold back, because you may have whatever, it's not a gender specific, but it is an issue to this point, that we all need to be able to speak up for ourselves, and we need to learn the language and practice in a safe space with people you trust, and build the vocabulary to navigate your negotiation and build your negotiation skills. So you can go and say, well, here are some things for you to think about, and here are some surveys. I've actually used surveys to just kind of build the case. and prevent the evidence. This is what the industry is doing, and the survey was done less than 2 years ago. Yes, our pay scale has been traditionally or historically this way, another bias, but here's what is necessary for us to look at: marketplace.
Great, thank you. Okay, final question, which something you've kind of touched on, and you said one piece. What's one key piece of practical advice you would give for someone at the beginning of their career, in particular a female?
I think the smartest thing I ever did, and I tell people all the time, and this applies to all the people in the room, not just the women, the smartest thing I ever did was get involved in my professional organizations. And again, this may apply more to private business than government, but get involved. You will get to know people. You will learn from other people. And over a long period of time, you will develop a reputation for being smarter than you are, better than you are. You will get more than you give. And all in all, being a part of my professional organization really raised my personal profile or business profile. And I think it was one of the most advantageous things I ever did.
I would say 3 things. Know your rights, know your value or worth, and collect phone numbers. That's it.
All right then.
So 2, one is believe in what you do. Like, don't settle for a job because, it's a job or it gives you a whole bunch of money or it gives you status or whatever. I think the thing that people always recognize in me, that whenever I'm talking about what I'm doing, I'm always so excited, not because I'm like razzle-dazzle in front of people, but I literally believe in what I do. And I know that if I croaked this afternoon, thank you, I'll take all the knocks, because I have stuff to do, that I would go knowing that I did something that meant something to me. And so you'd be amazed at how motivating that is. And then the second thing is something that somebody just said to me. I was just in DC, and I was at this policy institute with a bunch of people in philanthropy. And I was talking to this African-American guy who's been in the field for like 15 years. And I'm new to philanthropy. I've been on the other side of the fence, but new to this universe. And when I first started, somebody said to me, so you realize now that you are standing in front of a group of people, most of whom have no natural predators in the wild. No one tells them no. No one says you can't do that. It's like, why? I have all the resources. I have all the power. I want that. And so it can get disheartening when you're, and I know, so I will say this is a safe space. I was in state government. I know how the giant machine, it's like trying to make the Titanic make a left turn quickly. It's hard. And so sometimes it gets disheartening, like, am I doing what I need to do? But he said something to me that I was just struck by its simplicity, and so I'll give it to you as well. Don't give up. Don't give up. There are going to be times when there are things that are happening, things that you just are mad. I mean, I sat in a thing at that same meeting that I got that great piece of advice, wanting to pull my hair out because I thought, oh my God, how are you talking like this in these times? Like, you're just so oblivious. Or, now everybody's doing DEI and the universe is all about, oh, I'm going to show and prove to you that I'm not racist. But I sit in all of these meetings with, folks who are early in their equity journey, having their major epiphany and their giant moment and telling me, oh my God, can you believe it? Racism happens. Oh, yeah, no, I'm hip, right? So it's that piece that could make you go, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm sick of it. I don't like it. But there is something there. There's something there. So if you believe in what you do, don't give up.
So my one piece of advice is, it depends on your stage of career, but to the question of someone starting out, be curious. Be curious and learn from others. Be curious and don't believe that you're the smartest person in the room. Be curious and ask questions. It's amazing how the conversation changes when you ask questions instead of just outright statements. It becomes an exchange, and you're actually forcing yourself to listen to others. So be curious if you're starting out in your career. Now, since we have a different audience, I'll just take this 1 minute to say, if you're at a different stage of career, use your power. So whatever is within your own capacity, if you're in mid-stage, if you're in your community, your neighborhood, whatever capacity you're in, use your power to take action. Because if all of us each did something, we're not asking you to take on the world. Unlike me, I need to say no to more things. Just use your power within what you have the capacity to offer. Because you do have a lot to offer to your community, whether you believe that or not, whatever stage of your career you're in.
Okay, well, fantastic. We've got some time to open it up for questions if anyone has. Robert?
Robert, there's a mic over there.
Thank you for being here. I was curious to know if you had any individuals, as far as mentors, that really stand out in your mind, or people that you really admire that have been a big part of the fabric of where you're at today.
For me, it was my mom. My mom is a powerful woman and a little intimidating, I have to say, when I was early in my career, but and my grandmother too. So I came from a string of women who expected to be in charge.
And I come from a very matriarchal family, so it was really all the aunties and my mom and my grandma, mostly my aunties and my grandma who were really, when I was in graduate school, we had to do this project, and I called my sister and said, were any of the aunties married? Because I don't remember having men around. But professionally, I also sought, through books, women, for instance, Faye Waddleton and Naomi Wolf, feminist people who had been in the fire. And I read those books and their stories so I could kind of connect and see what they went through and be like, oh, it's not just me going through this. And I think that's a great approach, because you don't have to meet them for them to be your mentor. You can read their story.
I sought out someone that was what I thought was the exact opposite of me. And that, I think, was probably one of the most pivotal decisions that I made around identifying somebody who's not going to just say, yeah, keep doing that, that's awesome, good, we're the same. I wanted somebody who would be slightly mean to me, because I wanted to know sort of the truth. Like, what are the kinds of things that I could do to be better, to move forward? So I picked someone that was the COO of the largest hospital system in Massachusetts. I was working for United Way then. And so, I'm in the United Way bubble. But she was like, listen, I watched you give a presentation. I want you to come to my office next week and do that presentation for me again. And she made me do it again, and she recorded it. And it was horrifying. I thought I was awesome. I'm like, whoa, I was so amazing. And she's like, this is where you could be better. Like, did you realize that you pace a lot when you're standing up? Do you realize that your hands are all over the place? Emphasize, but don't seem out of control. You are representing in a way that people need to be able to relate to you and understand you. So I have since taken that on this end. I'm now longer in the tooth, so people start looking to me for that stuff. It's like, what do you want mentorship for me? I'm only 20. No, I'm not. But I think that mentoring piece is really key, and especially for women, and for us to just be honest with each other. Not like, you're terrible, but here's where you can really shine if you can focus on that.
For myself, I actually had more sponsors, I'd say, in the workplace that really were champions for me. I was pretty shy growing up and in the workplace, and so I wasn't a demanding person. I've gotten past that, by the way. I'm not demanding, but I'm not passive, which is different. And So the sponsors were, I would say, are supervisors as well as just other leaders within the company that saw something in me and were very much encouraging of my growth in my career. And then actually for me, sometimes, I don't know why, but for me personally, finding mentors was actually really hard. So I would offer up to anybody who's asked to be a mentor, if you're asked, that's a big part or a big deal for the individual that's doing the ask. So don't take it take it seriously, because they really want to learn from you. And if you can find a way, even if it's just phone calls, be a mentor, help people have an outside source outside of their normal work group so that they can navigate through some issues or know that they're not crazy, whatever they're experiencing, and then get some tools and some help.
I want to add one more thing. I think, especially for women, you have to have a trusted circle of friends. It doesn't have to be a professional mentor. You need a what's said here stays here circle. So whether it's meeting once a week or once a month or whatever, to just have a vent time or whatever the case might be, have that group because you need it. That's maybe some wine, I don't know.
Great. Do we have time for another question? Okay, great. Mary?
Hello. Thank you for being here. It's so inspirational to hear from such a wide variety of perspectives. And partly this is a request as well as a question. But could you comment on the role of older women in your lives? When we talk about women in work, women in nonprofits, women in the community, we're often thinking the next generation's younger than us. And I know you all get around, and I'm partly asking for your help in not forgetting the people over 75 or 80 who were probably feminists and leaders long before it was cool, right? And then the second question is there an older woman, maybe not a mentor, in your life that made a difference?
And I can start while you're thinking. Again, my aunties and my grandma, because they were fearless. They were raised, because I was raised I was born in 1958, so they were all in the 20s, and so they were fearless women doing stuff that women in the 20s and 30s weren't supposed to be doing, and they didn't care. They didn't have a bucket full of care anywhere. and so people were kind of like, oh, there's those women. And so I think that was important. But when I was in the field of domestic violence and sexual assault, the women that I turned to were the women who were building that movement, the women who were starting those shelters, the women who were designing the laws in Oregon and other states. And without those women and everything that they brought to the table before me, the women who were building the first shelters, the women without whom we wouldn't have had the first laws, the women who were forming the safe circles around Planned Parenthood. Without those women, I would not have had what I had to lay the groundwork for everything that I did along my years in that field. And so for those women, I will be forever grateful, because among those women, they brought hundreds of years collectively of experience to me.
So I've been doing a little work around genealogy and trying to figure out where I come from. And I had this great opportunity to go to Africa last year. And I had this conversation with this woman who was older than me. And this is something that I knew for myself. I'm 54. I felt like a light switch come on when I was about 43. Like something just happened. I don't know what it was. I just felt like if I could shoot like darts and arrows out of my fingers, I could. Like there was just this something's happening here. way more than I did when I was younger. And so it made me start paying attention to older women in my life, because it's like, God, if I'm feeling like this at like 43, what are you feeling in your 60s or 70s, like all this magical stuff? So when I was in Africa, I had this conversation with this woman who said, you know, in our culture, if a man believes that he wants to be on the path to be a high priest in our community, he has to apprentice for 7 years to do that. But if a woman at any time in her life feels that she is on the path to being a priestess, she just is. She just is, right? And so as you're thinking about, God, like, what am I offering, or who am I in this world? The older I get, the more wise I am. I wish I had the stamina of my 20-year-old self in the brain of my 54-year-old self. It would probably be insanity. But I think that's the part where women have always honored other women. I think, no offense to the dudes in the room, but I mean, this has just been part of who we are, that we operate in that space of recognizing the priestess in all of us. And so I think that's the part where, if we're imagining what do we get from older women, it's that the wisdom of a priestess is in every one of us.
I'll be brief. I was just talking to a 72-year-old retired travel agent who was telling me she's really semi-part-time retired, because she's still doing arrangements and books, trips, and packages. I said, that's amazing. And I said, we were talking about a space. I also am president for the Philippine American Chamber, and we were talking about her role on the board. And she says, yeah, I'm a little bit slowing down, but I'm still busy. And I'm like, there's so much wisdom that you could share with the young entrepreneurs, people starting out. Yeah, there's a lot of tools and technology, but there's so much wisdom that if you could help them elevate their efforts, or escalate their efforts to in a positive way, and learn from your lessons rather than having to suffer through some lessons of their own as a new business owner. There's so much value you can bring. So I would say there's lots of space for older women to contribute to our community, to contribute to other generations. It's just finding the right, call me, I'll give you my card. And we'll connect you with other people if that's an interest to you and anyone in the room.
Everybody look at me. Oh my God, what I did wrong. Hello. Okay. I want to say thank you so much for everybody. Some of you coming from Vancouver, Portland, Brooks, Salem, Portland. Thank you for being here, taking the time from your hard working schedule to come and share time with us. But I also don't want to forget, we have our technical support back there, Steve Carlton. I'm getting feedback from the staff in the field. They love all of you. Okay. They're telling me it went amazing. So, and Steve, thank you for the support back there. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Pleasure
Nice
to
to
have
meet
you
you.
today. Very nice to have you.
Turn off my